Same old game over.
You're gonna need a bigger potion. So serious.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 562 for November 27th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. We hope you had a great Thanksgiving holiday weekend, at least for those in the United States.
I'm still full. Still full.
Got to celebrate Thanksgiving. A lot of family and food and football.
A lot of football.
It was pretty glorious.
Lots of football on your side. I think you have some gloating to do. Is that what you're going to be doing soon?
Well, you know, it was an interesting start to the holiday because as we noted last week on the show, was it? I'm trying to recall. I guess it was last week on the show.
Last week as we recorded this. It was, you're acknowledging the potential 8-3 or 9-2 record that the Lions could hold.
Yeah, so I was talking about the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
And we were debating the whole Thanksgiving Christmas thing, which ended up being a full segment, and we didn't even plan for that to happen.
No, we did not.
It was really fun. But yes, during that conversation, I talked about how the Detroit Lions at the time, they were 8-2 heading into Thanksgiving, and who knows, maybe this will be a change of pace. But no, Brendan, they did not decide to go against tradition. They came out, played awful, and as they do, they lose on Thanksgiving. So they kept everything intact. It was glorious. It was a lot of fun. And
it was a lot of fun. They lost. They played horribly. Tradition stands.
Tradition stands. So, and look, as we noted last week, a loss, worst case, they're still 8-3. They're still
they're not
fine.
Bad.
Still fine, but you lose a game that you should win, especially at home, but it is what it is.
Sure.
However, fast forward a few days. I promise you we will get to film soon. We have a lot to talk about. We will
I might just let JD have the floor with this one. I might just take a back seat. Maybe I'll grab my bass guitar and just do a few noodles, a few licks or something like that. I just bought a new one. Can I gloat for a second? I just bought a new one. For those watching on YouTube, there's a new little toy in the corner there. I just got it.
Very exciting. Very exciting. But yes, this last weekend was a lot of fun for me because, as I noted last week on the show, many a times here on the show, I hail from the great state of Michigan and am a University of Michigan football fan.
Indeed.
And this last weekend, they played the Ohio State University in the game, as it's been dubbed.
The game, right?
Look, for some context, okay, because not everyone out there is aware of this rivalry. Maybe you have forgotten who wins and loses each and every year. And look, I understand. I am that with a lot of other rivalries. You can't keep them. You can't keep up with them all. So when I was growing up, Michigan dominated this rivalry. In the 90s, I think they won like 7 of the 10 games in the 90s. And I graduated high school in 2004. And I think they won 2 of the 4 years I was in high school. So like through the 90s and through my time in high school, they pretty much thoroughly punished the Buckeyes year in and year out. After 2004, however, 2003, I guess it would have been the 2003 season. And I head to college, things got quite different.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Jim Tressel comes to Ohio State, and the Buckeyes take a stranglehold on this rivalry. So again, for context, the Michigan Wolverines, since 2003, since 2003, all the way up to 2021, so almost a 20-year gap, they won that game one time in 2011. Okay.
I think I remember that. Yeah.
They lost straight from 2004 to 2010.
Yeah.
They lost that game. They get the one win in 2011. And then from 2012 through 2019, Ohio State won all of those games.
Yeah.
They get the COVID year where they didn't play because of COVID.
Right.
And let's be honest, Ohio State would have demolished Michigan if they did play. So sure, if you want to count from 2011 to 2020, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Then Michigan makes these changes. I talked about this a little bit on a Patreon episode some weeks ago because there's been some, what I like to call these soft allegations toward Michigan. Anyone that knows the game of football knows
you
it's
mean
all
this
nonsense.
future? You mean this future Martin Scorsese movie?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But even if we remove the drama element of it, and it is very cinematic when you look at it broadly speaking, it wouldn't surprise me if they turn it into some sort of documentary or movie or series.
Oh, yeah, it's coming.
It really is quite. I mean, there's spies involved.
There's vacuum cleaners involved too.
Vacuum cleaners, private investigators,
manifestos.
Rivals. Yeah, manifestos. It's been a journey. I'm telling you, these last 2 months have been a journey.
You can start throwing random names out there. They were probably involved in some way. Teletubbies were involved. At this point, I wouldn't believe it.
And look, some football talking heads, I think, articulated it perfectly this last week where they noted, so again, you don't have to take it from me. You can take it from the so-called experts.
Yeah.
That we're talking about how if you know the game of football, and I do study it, that in hockey, I know at a very meticulous, intricate detail. I can talk about those games in any nerdy way you want. However, they were saying, if you know the game of football, you know that all of this toward Michigan this year, it's nonsense. It is a PR-driven battle, is what it is. It's a news-driven battle. It's one team can't beat the other, so they have to find a different way to gain an advantage, which means we're hiring private investigators to spy on our other team to get them in trouble, kind of a thing. Yeah. What Michigan was accused of doesn't impact the game all that much. The NCAA said as much 2 years ago. Anyway, I say all of that to say, in 2021, the reason Michigan has changed the trajectory of that rivalry is in 2021, Jim Harbaugh fires his staff essentially and hires a completely new one.
Yeah.
So he brings in Sharon Moore and a few other offensive minds. He brings in defensive coordinators and defensive assistants from his brother's NFL team. So they're coming from NFL systems. They're bringing NFL defensive structures and systems to the to Michigan, to the college level. They completely revamped the team and the structure going forward. They bring in a different conditioning guy to revitalize the whole strength and conditioning aspect of the game. He brought in a new staff and a new mentality. They brought in a guy to, I forget what his role was, but his role was essentially to create immaculate vibes. Yeah, that was his role. I forget, there's a technical term for it, but that's essentially, he was brought in to essentially reshift the culture, if you will.
I'm just trying to think of what a name like that could be. You're right. There is an official title for that.
Yeah, I can't recall. I'd have to look it up.
Offensive Viber?
At any rate, whatever it's called, he readjusted the program, and there was a mindset shift. There was a physical shift. There was a schematic shift. Everything changes, and that's the reason that they've been beating Ohio State. It has nothing to do with a low-level staffer getting grainy iPhone footage, which means nothing. There's nothing you can do with that.
Gosh,
so
that story, man,
that
story.
It's ridiculous. And then again, if you break down the game, if you get really nerdy and into the details, which I won't do here, but when you do that, you come to understand that it's the players on the field, it's calls happening in real time, where you can't take all of these so-called stolen signs or whatever it is that you want to accuse them of, like that. It just can't impact the game on a broad scale because everything's happening so fast. And again, it all comes down to, even if you know what's about to happen, you have to go out there and stop it. And that's the thing. In 2021, when Michigan won the first time against Ohio State, they passed the ball 5 times in the second half. 5. They ran it on every single play. Ohio State knew what was happening. Ohio State had Michigan signs anyway. We'll let that go for a second. But they knew that Michigan was running the ball on every play, and they still couldn't stop it. They couldn't. Michigan just manhandled them, physically manhandled them. That's why they won that game.
Yeah.
And, and again, we could get into 2022 as well. So my point in all of that to say, the reason I'm here to gloat, if you will, or to, I guess, bring some Michigan pride to this is some of it is a level of disbelief. I mean, when you win one game and about a 20-year span, you become jaded. You become like the rivalry becomes non-existent. For the longest time until 2021, I was at a point where I feel like the rivalry between Michigan and Ohio State shouldn't even be considered a rivalry.
It was kind of dissipating.
Like, it was, the game was becoming meaningless and there was nothing at stake.
Yeah.
And the media tried to manufacture something that wasn't ever really there.
No,
because Ohio State was winning every single
Yeah, they were trying
time.
to market something out of it.
Exactly. And it became a futile exercise. Now, if you're an Ohio State fan, I'm sure you were having a great time, and I don't blame you for that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really a rivalry. I mean, again, almost 20 years.
Well, yeah, I think that's why it's fun to call it a rivalry as a Penn State fan from my perspective, because there's always some level of unpredictability when it comes to us playing either Michigan or Ohio State, right?
Yeah.
It could many times it could go either way. So that's kind of the basis of a rivalry, right?
Yeah.
You kind of need that dynamic for a rivalry to even be a thing. And what you're arguing is that basis really wasn't even there in the first place for a while.
Exactly. Like the Globetrotters and the Generals, not a rivalry.
Not a rivalry.
Turns out the Globetrotters win every time.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Alert.
It's like they're paid to do that.
And so and that's how it was becoming in a lot of ways. So as a Michigan fan, when you go that long and you're just consistently losing, there isn't a whole lot of hope. There certainly isn't much excitement. And now here we are 3 years in a row where they've beaten Ohio State for the first time 3 years in a row since the mid-90s. And there's a level of shock. There's a level of, I can't believe this is happening. It's obviously very exciting now, but that's why I wanted to spend a few moments here, because I don't have a sports podcast. This is the only platform that I have. And I just wanted to let everyone know that I am in a very happy mood, because the last 20 years have been really hard. And now we've won 3 in a row, and it just kind of, it brings me back to my childhood in many ways. And it's fun to see this being a rivalry again.
And can I add to that too? Because I feel like that rivalry not only exists now because of the past 3 years, as you're saying, but even more so now this year, especially at this moment, given those allegations against Michigan and those level 3 offenses and the speculation that Ohio State had something to do with the kickstarting of those, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the other aspect of this.
It almost makes this game that you won a tale of revenge.
Well, yes. So going into Saturday, everyone, and rightfully so, was saying that this is the most important game in this rivalry, in the history of Michigan Ohio State.
Yeah,
and there's been some incredible games, some incredibly important games, but there has never been a bigger game than the one that we saw on Saturday. One, because both teams were undefeated. So the playoff and the national championship is at stake. The Big Ten championship is at stake. And as you're alluding to, all of the allegations at Michigan have derived from Ohio State. We know that to be true.
Yeah.
We know that to be true. Ohio State hired a private investigative firm, which, again, unethical, but whatever.
Yeah.
They hired a private investigative firm to dig up this dirt on Michigan. And they find these things, they present it to the Big Ten and the NCAA, and thus this circus that we've seen these last 2 months. And as a result, Michigan's had to fire a couple of assistant coaches, and the low-level assistant that was being accused of these things or whatever. And they've had to change their systems a little bit. So Michigan no longer does signs, at least on offense. They use the quarterback armband. So they've gotten rid of all of that stuff.
Right.
Since the Michigan State game. So like the last 5 games or so, they haven't been using these so-called signs that, again, added really very little to the game. But they've been winning. They've been playing well enough. And so, yes, aside from the playoff being at stake and the Big Ten championship at stake, there was a huge narrative at stake. Because if Michigan loses, then it gives all of these naysayers, all of these haters, especially Ohio State, it gives their narrative, despite the objective truth of it, it gives their narrative credence. And as I noted earlier, this has been a narrative war. It hasn't been a war of let's make it happen on the football field. It's been a PR battle, which Michigan has been losing, admittedly. Partially because they're under investigation, and as a result, there's a gag order. They can't speak on the investigation. Yeah. That's part of the indignancy of it on Michigan's end. And Ohio State has been able to go full on into the narrative war. They've been winning that war. And if Michigan was to lose that game, it would have utterly devastated the last 2 years. Again, despite the objective truth of it, people would have thought of it as on some sort of unfair advantage, that there was a caveat to it all, even though there isn't. Ohio State admitted themselves they changed their signs before last year's game and got beat worse than they did in 2021. But that doesn't fit the narrative. So that's right. They put that underneath the rug, right? And it's not just Ohio State, but the reporters that they pay off, Pete Thamel at ESPN and some of these others, like that's not in the narrative war, so they don't talk about those things. And Michigan needed to win that game to prove that it never had anything to do with signs, that it had everything to do with coaching and with the players on the field. And they did it. Yeah. They did it. They won the game. And not only that, with Jim Harbaugh being out, Ryan Day, Ohio State's coach, got out-coached by a substitute teacher, by an interim coach who had to double dip in duties because he's also the offensive coordinator. Not great.
JD, how do you really feel? How do you really feel?
I'm just saying, like, when you're feeling vindicated, there's a lot to be happy about. And it turns out that it has nothing to do with signs. And now Ohio State and everyone has come to realize that all of these narratives that they've been told are lies. And that was what was at stake, not just for this year, but for the last 2 years as well. And I'm feeling pretty good.
You must be humming a little James Brown right now. I feel good.
Exactly. I'm feeling mighty good. So these.
And I knew that you would now.
Yeah. So it's been great. Now Michigan's on to the Big Ten championship, and which is going to be
number two.
A lot of fun. Now I don't want to get ahead of myself. I don't want to assume anything. But if Michigan wins the Big Ten championship, and this is something Michigan fans, and I'm sure those on staff as well, have really been looking forward to, because part of the problem here is that the Big Ten commissioner, this is his first year, he's a rookie commissioner, doesn't know anything about football. He comes from Harvard Law background. And by Harvard Law, I mean he probably has a rich daddy that sent him to Harvard. Because I don't think he ever actually practiced law, but he gets this cozy job because he knows the right person. And when Ohio State and all of these other teams were coming to him whining and complaining, he got bullied and he backed down to the bullying. Yeah. And he's the one that suspended Jim Harbaugh, despite saying himself that he has no evidence against Jim Harbaugh. So what's going to happen on Saturday if Michigan wins the Big Ten championship and he has to hand Jim Harbaugh the Big Ten championship trophy? Like, that's going to be a moment. That's gonna be a moment.
So basically, this Martin Scorsese film we keep teasing is going to be made. It's not done yet. The story's still there's still more to the story.
That's what I'm saying.
If that ends up happening, that is a perfect Wolf of Wall Street level conclusion.
Yes, it really is.
That is just as edgy as Sell Me This Pen. Like
I'm telling you, exactly. This has all of the makings of a really great Scorsese film. There has been a ton of drama. Like, even if you're not a sports fan, if I was to sit here and tell you all of the drama that's unfolding, it's like watching a Scorsese movie. It really is. It's astonishing.
It's great. And maybe that should be our transition into movies, because we've talked about sports for a while. We apologize to our watchers and listeners who are maybe not as in tune with the NCAA as we are, but it's fun to have an outlet to chat about it when we can. Though I'm glad you had the opportunity to vent there. Jamie.
Yeah, I appreciate it. But yes, that was a lot of words to say that things are well for me.
Michigan
right
proud.
Like,
Michigan proud.
I'm happy. But yes, let's talk about some movies. We're going to talk about Ridley Scott on this episode because, as you may know, he had a new movie that came out in theaters over the weekend, Napoleon, which we'll have a review of coming very, very soon.
Yes.
And it did very well at the box office. I think I saw that it was his best theatrical release in something like 13 years.
I think it was it was close to 80 million, something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it did very well.
It did better than an animated movie by Disney. I mean, that right there is a narrative that really spells trouble for Disney.
Absolutely. And maybe we can get into that a little bit because I went to see this film, Brendan, Napoleon. Again, we'll talk about it as a review coming very soon. I went to see this at something like 9:30 at night. This was Saturday, actually, after the Michigan-Ohio State game. So I went into the theater just all giddy. But I went to see this at 9:30 at night on a Saturday, and there was not, and I mean this literally, not an empty seat in my theater. It was packed to the brim.
I saw this, Napoleon specifically, at like 11 a.m. on Sunday. Packed theater.
Yeah.
Packed theater. Whether you like the movie or not, I think is beside the point. But maybe this then goes back to what we keep saying about movies like Oppenheimer and Barbie doing so well. Is it just the grandness of it, the bigness, the originality of it, the fact that we don't get movies like that as much anymore? Is that what audiences are now clamoring for once again? Has the shift started?
You know, it's really interesting. I didn't really have this on the list for us to talk about on this episode, but since we're on it, I really do want to talk about it, or at least spend a few minutes here, because it does circle back to the theme of the summer, at least when we were talking about this quite often. It felt like it was getting even a little redundant because we kept seeing these non-franchise movies do extremely well while the franchise movies struggled. And Napoleon continues that trend. And I don't know if I would have guessed that.
I wouldn't have.
There's no way anyone saw this coming.
Yeah. And I mean, we know that a 4-hour version of the film is coming out on Apple TV sometime this weekend, maybe next weekend. I'm not exactly sure. But knowing that the film that's playing in theaters now is still well over 2.5 hours, I mean, that is a daunting task for a lot of people. And yet it's doing pretty darn well.
It is doing very well. And as you noted, it was up against a Disney animated film.
Yeah.
And Disney has struggled. And it's interesting because earlier this year, Brennan, we talked about Elemental. Now, Elemental is a Pixar film, obviously a little different than Disney animated studios. And the marketing might be a little bit different. Their Wish and Elemental are very, very different experiences, obviously.
Right.
But out of the gate, and maybe this is foreshadowing for Wish, maybe we should keep an eye on it because I feel like we are currently caught within the same trap that we talked about with Elemental when it first came out, which was disastrous. Its opening weekend or two was not very good. However, over the course of the summer, what happened?
It found legs. It found legs after the fact.
Legs.
Yeah, I get what'll help Wish. And again, I haven't seen the film. I haven't even really watched any of the marketing or trailers for Wish. But what'll help that film specifically is if at least one of its musical numbers becomes a hit. And
Yes.
kind of and
Like
I don't know.
Encanto,
Yeah. Encanto had
Frozen.
We Don't Talk About Bruno, right? So like
Yep.
that gave that film some legs. You've seen Wish, but we might talk about it vaguely. But like, do you know if there's at least one song that people are starting to latch onto, or does it seem pretty premature to say that?
I think it's premature. I don't think there's much there in terms of a single to come out of that movie.
Okay.
I could be wrong. Part of, I guess, the fizzling out of that film for me, I don't know if we'll get to a full review of it. I guess short of it is I found it middling. I think it's fine.
Okay.
I think it's perfectly fine.
I feel like that's the worst thing to say for a movie like that.
Yeah, as a Disney celebratory film of sorts, I think it serves its purpose fine. But I do think it lacks the magic of many of the films that it's celebrating.
Gotcha. Okay.
And a big part of that in particular is the music. I mean, when you think of Disney animated movies, especially its musicals, I mean, how many iconic songs come from these movies?
Too many.
An endless conversation.
Even the movies I don't like, I can think of one song that has an ability to get stuck in anyone's head. There's melodic memorability with most of their songs, regardless if they come from good movies or not.
Exactly. And that's the pivotal thing here, right? Because no one talks about Disney animated movies. Some of them for sure.
Yeah.
But most of them, we're not sitting here going, you know what? The screenplay to Snow White, off the charts. It was incredible. Best writing of the year. And no one's saying that. No one's saying that. Now, there are a few films that certainly subvert convention.
Yeah. In a more normal way, they might say, "Oh, I love the story for Beauty and the Beast" or something like that.
You know,
that's probably the way
Lion
they would
King
verbalize it. Yeah.
Pixar, I think, has done a much better job of bridging that gap between writing and animation and storytelling than I'd say Disney. But where Disney makes up with its pretty simple, rudimentary stories that have pandered more to a younger audience than, let's say, Pixar films, which are typically, historically, movies for adults and children.
Yeah.
Which is something you noted on Twitter last week, I believe it was.
Oh, yeah.
Aptly.
Yep.
However, Disney's animated films, and look, I love many of them, but they're not known for writing. What they're known for are its musical numbers. That's where it makes that up. And with the characters having some sort of trait or characteristic, or there's something about them that we just love. I think with Wish, it gets, I think there is something about Asha, its central character, that is endearing and charming. I think the film gets that part right. But its musical numbers, at least for me on a first going, I didn't find them remarkable. There's one song that I love, actually, on the soundtrack in the film that's really great, but I don't see that being a number that has like pop hit written all over it.
It doesn't have Bruno legs.
It doesn't have Bruno legs. I think it works great in the context of the film, especially.
Sure.
And I loved listening to it on Spotify after the fact as well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have a pop sensibility to it.
No. Gotcha.
And so I just don't see one here that's going to carry the film forward in that regard.
Yeah.
But, you know, I still don't want to elemental it.
Yeah. I think you're smart to hold back on the quote unquote failure of it all, because we've been surprised by an animated movie earlier this year with Elemental, as you said, from a box office standpoint. It snuck out. It snuck out in the last minute. So we'll see what happens. But the fact that it's initially losing to a nearly 3-hour historical epic on Napoleon is pretty interesting.
And I think it's twofold. There are two pivots here, or two crucial supports that I think are at the nucleus of this dichotomy between these two films.
Right.
One of them is the Oppenheimer conversation that we talked about already. Napoleon fits the bill of, hey, I'm tired of all of this other nonsense. And here's Ridley Scott, a filmmaker that I know. He's made this historical epic. Let's go watch it.
Yeah.
And as of right now, it's made $80 million worldwide.
Okay.
And I think that's about 70 million more than we anticipated. And look, I'm being facetious there, but
what was the budget for this again? Too. I mean, that's the thing. Like, how does Ridley Scott get these movies made so quickly? Because his last movie was The Last Duel. Like, I don't know how he does it.
Yeah. According to this, its budget was like around 150 million. So it still has a way to go to make up its budget.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone expected it to do as well as it has.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, the other key thing here, and others have pointed this out, we've talked about this many times, but it's the whole Disney Plus of it all.
Yeah.
That's a lot of families, I'm sure, are simply waiting for this to come to Disney Plus.
Because it'll be there before the year ends.
Yeah, and that's where we have to wait and see, a la Elemental, right? Because I think that film comes out, it's initially tepid in the response, obviously, and then people started to come out and tell their friends, actually, it's pretty good. We enjoyed it. I think your kids will enjoy it. Then they take their kids and they enjoy it, and then they tell their friends, and then it spreads.
Yeah.
And they start to see it before it drops on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
That's how Wish gets its legs here.
I'm trying to remember if Elemental had a planned Disney Plus release date that maybe got pushed back because of those surprising legs it developed at the last minute. I don't know if that was ever part of the narrative there, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that was a conversation being had by Disney that wasn't, public, right?
Yeah.
So if that's going to happen, then Wish needs to find those legs before that planned Disney Plus release ends up happening.
Yeah, I don't know if Elemental had that. I don't even know if Wish had that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But this is either way, and this is, I think, indicative of the problem, right?
Yeah.
Disney has conditioned audiences to simply wait regardless.
Yeah.
We may or may not know if it's coming to Disney Plus soon, but we assume it's going to hit Disney Plus in 3 months. Let's just wait for it.
And it's not even just Disney Plus. It's also the fact that many of these smaller films that we've loved and championed and wanted people to go out and see in a theater get pretty quick digital releases. I mean, The Holdovers, a film that you and I both loved, is apparently coming out in, I think, tomorrow as we're recording this.
Very soon.
Yeah.
This week.
And that's going to be one of those cases where you either buy it or rent it for like $20 on Amazon Prime, for instance, but you have two people in a household, you pay $20 for a rental. That's still less than going to the movie theater. So of course people are going to take advantage of that. And many movies have done that same thing. So again, that adds to that same level of conditioning you're talking about.
Absolutely. It compounds on itself. Yeah. It's not just Disney, it's other studios. You're certainly right on the money there. But with Disney animated films, they've conditioned audiences. This is what to expect.
Yeah.
And at the time when COVID was unfolding, Disney Plus made sense because it was a way to remedy the fact that, hey, we couldn't leave the house. And I think they did a good job of remedying that gap there. But now that we're on the other side of it, it's as if Disney Plus has become this shacklehold that is keeping the company from really moving forward all these years later.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's not just Pixar and Disney. There's obviously a lot more to it because they haven't handled the MCU great for reasons we've talked about. Star Wars is a disaster of a franchise.
Yeah.
And it just seems as every bucket they have, they've handled with a level of misguidance that is
they spilled the bucket.
They've spilled the bucket. The buckets are everywhere.
Or they just puked in it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what Bob Iger was expecting. I know he's extremely upset. And look, you're not going to get any sympathy from me, Bob. You've been a disaster, and not just the whole Disney Plus fiasco, but the strikes and everything that goes on there as well.
Yeah, that's oh my gosh.
He's a nightmare. So I don't feel bad for him. However, I do feel, I guess, for audiences that have to deal with the choices that he's making.
Well, yeah, and I feel bad for the content creators who actually want to partake in art.
Yeah, the artists.
If anything, the artists involved, whether it be the directors, actors, most notably the visual effects artists working overtime, and their products still not looking up to par. We've talked about that many times. Like, that's probably the biggest problem here in all of this.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny, the vindication. That is going to be the theme of this episode, apparently, because I know it was made in jest. Someone tweeted a Transformers clip that was in response to what is cinema. And I know that Dark of the Moon, as a response to this is cinema, is made sarcastically. However, what was interesting about it was some of the responses to that tweet, because you look at Dark of the Moon now in hindsight of the last 13 years, because I think they came out in 2010, right?
2011.
Somewhere around there.
And I mean, heck, even the final act, the whole quote unquote light in the sky aspect of it, predated the Avengers by a full year.
It did. Yeah. And the visual effects of that film far outweigh what we get now. So again, say what you will about Michael Bay and his Transformers films, and in a way they are gobbledygook. I understand. But in context of 2023, there is an elegance to the visuals of those films that are missing in a lot of blockbusters.
Well,
I'm just saying.
I agree with you, man. You can even go back further. I mean, that was 2011 when that film came out.
Oh yeah.
Let's go back another.
Pirates a lot.
Oh, well, I was just going to bring up Pirates of the Caribbean, specifically Dead Man's Chest, and a lot of that really comes down to the design work and the overall execution of Davy Jones, right?
Yeah,
and even just the vision, the weirdness of it too. Like it's to a point now. You watch that movie, you think these are visual effects that came back from the future. Like that's how it looks nowadays. Like it almost looks like it came back from the future. Like it's almost illegal to have these good of effects nowadays. It's ridiculous.
It's interesting you say that, Brennan. I think that is an impeccable transition to the next thing I wanted to talk about here, because earlier today, there was an Edgar Wright floating around where he said, quote, "I wish some franchises would just kind of have the sense to just take a breather and let people get excited about again.
Yep.
There are certain things that I loved that I don't want to see again, or I don't want to see them again for a long time. I wish some films and series that people would understand it's okay to take a break and build anticipation." And look, I think that quote is important for a couple of reasons. Not just the anticipation element of it, he's right there, but as it relates to what we're talking about here, the other thing it does, it gives the visual effects artist more time to render those effects.
That's it.
So you don't have to worry about, hey, we shot it this year, this has to come out in 8 months. So you have to get it done now.
Isn't it great when you can just take your time to do something you want and need to get done? Like it feels so much better. And you're right, not just from a visual effects standpoint. I really think the big thing is just giving audiences that breather, because then they learn to get excited about something that isn't just commonly there all the time. I mean, we talked about this with Marvel. While we're still mostly getting the usual 3 movie a year schedule. But when you splice that in with varying Disney Plus shows, you're getting a new Marvel thing almost every month. Yeah. And that begins to psychologically change a person to think, oh, I've got something new here. And then it becomes work when, for whatever reason, you go on your honeymoon, you can't watch Secret Invasion or something like that. And all of a sudden you're behind. and you're behind.
Exactly. I mean, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Edgar Wright is very right when he
No
is
pun
talking
intended.
about taking a break. Yeah, exactly. All pun intended. He's Edgar Wright about this.
Yeah.
Where 3 Marvel movies a year, I don't think is too much. I really don't, especially given the fact that, you know, the mainstream audience has grown to love the MCU.
Yeah.
Which was indicative of the whole Infinity War and Endgame saga.
Yep.
And how all of that crystallized, not just in terms of the audience response to it, but financially, it just killed, right? So there are a lot of people invested in that franchise. And I don't think 3 films is going to tire audiences. I don't. However, you're right. When you add in all of the Disney Plus shows, it becomes homework because, as we've talked about, as you all know, it's required viewing in some instances and a lot of instances.
Yeah.
And it can just start to feel overwhelming when you have a new Marvel thing every month or every few months. And to Edgar Wright's point, it doesn't leave any room at all to build anticipation, to get ready for the next thing, for you to even wrestle with what you just saw.
Yeah.
We just saw Secret Invasion. I had a minute to rest on it, and then all of a sudden there's Loki and the Marvels.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I have to ingest that and then wrestle with what I just saw, and another month in January, the next thing comes out.
And it's the chronological nature of it all that you have to watch them in succession of one another. It's not like how Star Wars is being treated, because Star Wars releases maybe a new show. They haven't done a movie in a while for obvious reasons, but they release some type of new content. Whether you like their content or not, I feel like they're at least doing it right as far as keeping things sort of episodic, quite literally. They kind of live in their own narrative bubbles, but will have ties and allusions to things that you already know, but they're not necessarily required viewing. And I feel like Star Wars would be having more success if there was just a better handling that Disney had on the initial sequel trilogy. If that stuck the landing, Star Wars would actually be in a good place right now. But sadly, there was a mishandling from the get-go that created this sad aura around Star Wars nowadays. But there was at least potential there for that to work.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because Star Wars was the OG franchise that was the anticipation builder, right?
Yeah, it was.
It was, let's immerse you in this huge, vast universe with these electrifying characters and great drama and remarkable sci-fi. You have to wait 4 or 5 years for the next one.
I love that. I love that. I really do.
I love that as well. And, you know, of course, that carried into, not quite in terms of length, but into the prequels a little bit. And look, I kind of understand, like, hey, with the prequels, we're still getting one every, 2 years?
It was 3 years.
Year and a half?
It was
3 years?
So with the prequels, it was every 3 years. For the original trilogy, it was also every 3 years. Because it came out. Yeah. So that's actually a pretty good stretch of time. The sequel trilogy, which we just got, was every 2 years, which is still not bad, but that is still weirdly one extra year adds a looseness to it that I think franchises like that do need. 2 years is still pretty tight, honestly, when you really think about other Star Wars content that was coming out at the time, too.
Absolutely. And the gap between the original series and the prequel was, another 11 or 12 years, something like that. So there was a lot of...
83 to 99, so that's 16 years.
Yeah, quite a long time between the two trilogies.
Yeah. Although what Lucasfilm did do at that time was, I think in 97 was when they did the special editions of the original trilogy in preparation for the prequel trilogy that was coming out. So it did a good job bringing Star Wars back on the brain only maybe 13 years later or something like that, which then built the right anticipation. But still, to your point, long time.
And obviously they had the comics and the legacy novels and everything that came alongside the films.
Yeah.
But there was still quite a long time in between. And so all you could do, at least for the film fans, is to wait for the next one.
Yeah.
To let that anticipation build, let that excitement increase. And even from the prequel to when The Force Awakens comes out, that's another 10 years or so. It's just unfortunate that they ended up botching the last film, because I think the first two are quite great, despite how distinct they are on their own terms.
Which
I think they're
could
both
have
very good,
worked. Like the idea of a yin and yang between the two, and then episode 9 to be this middle ground, like that could have been a really interesting concept.
I think that would have been fantastic, especially if they were aware of that. If Disney, if Kathleen Kennedy had any sort of self-awareness at all to look at, hey, we have this very good film from J.J. Abrams. We got Ryan Johnson doing a film that is so completely different. That's exciting. They're both good, but very different. Where can we bridge this into the next one in a natural, organic way, not a manufactured way? The way it ended up coming out.
The answer to their problems was not to just bring back J.J. Abrams and try to meet a 2019 release date. They should have delayed The Rise of Skywalker or whatever it ended up being called. If they had a different time, it was originally called Duel of the Fates, I think. That should have just been delayed at least another 5 years just to get it right.
Delay it. It's fine. We'll wait. Just make sure you get it right. And that's the thing. I understand that JJ's name is attached to it, and he's taken some ownership of it a little bit. But when you look at the behind the scenes and what really went down when making that film, that was not a J.J. Abrams film. That was a Lucasfilm disaster. They were in charge of that whole thing from the beginning. They just had to slap a name on it and paid JJ a lot of money to take the sword there.
Oh, he was a scapegoat. That's all he was.
He was a scapegoat.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's unfortunate. And so now, as a result of that blunder, what if they've had to do? Well, we need to create other content around this to remedy that mistake. It's one thing to say, hey, look, we're going to have these animated shows, or we're going to do these live action shows, and that's how we're going to fill in the gap of Star Wars until we figure out whatever the next series of movies is going to be. It'd be one thing if that was the decision and they let the creators make these various series. And to a degree, that's what they did with Andor. I think that's why it was so effective.
Yeah.
The Mandalorian, in some ways, is a miracle, because I do think the first two seasons are genuinely good.
Yeah.
And I think it ends on a really touching and poignant note. However, the trajectory of that show from A to Z, from the first episode of season 1 to the last episode of season 2, what was the trajectory there, Brendan? What were they trying to do? They were trying to remedy the nonsense of cloning in the third film.
Yeah.
Because it was so bad, they have to explain how we got there. And so
it's a course correct.
It's a course correction. So they took The Mandalorian, and of course they wanted to have characters that people liked.
Yeah.
And they needed toys to sell, so they did a good job there. Check.
Yeah. Oh, gotta love Grogu.
However, despite how good the individual episodes are and the characters and the emotion of it, which I think was all effective, but the broad plan was, from a plotting standpoint, we have to explain the whole Palpatine thing coming back.
Yeah.
And that's what they teased for three seasons. Now that we've seen season 3, the whole thing has been about explaining the nonsense of the third film. Of Palpatine coming back.
Yeah. Or you get a movie like Rogue One, which you and I feel like we both want to love, but we just can't latch on to the human element of it as much. But of course, you have a great book like Catalyst leading into it to kind of do the work for us. So there will be some type of medium, whether it be television or in some cases a book, to do that work that we feel like these individual properties, the films, need to do. Yeah. And they're not doing that.
Not doing that at all. At least with Catalyst, that was always meant to be a prequel book, and it is a direct tie-in to the movie.
Yeah.
You know, you got the same characters involved.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The book shouldn't have carried as much weight into it as it did. It's a great book. I
love
highly
it.
recommend
I love it. It does make Rogue One better, but that's kind of also the problem with Rogue One.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But what does The Mandalorian have anything to do with Episode 9?
It does not. It has nothing
to do with it. That to me is the big difference here. It would be one thing if it was a spin-off and it was a Ridley or Daisy Ridley show.
Ray?
Ray. Sorry. I'm so bad. I'm just forgetting names.
I'm kind
of. If it was a Ray
point.
show, and apparently we are getting one of those, or she's getting a spinoff.
She's getting a movie.
Getting a movie. So that is eventually coming. Like if it was, or maybe you just did a direct Palpatine spinoff show that said, "Hey, this will explain it in more detail to help fill in the gaps." That would be akin to Catalyst. Like, okay, they pre-planned a show to help explain something from the movie.
Yeah.
And it's a pseudo sequel kind of thing.
Doesn't mean it would be good or necessary, but it would make more sense to do that within a show like that as opposed to your point, The Mandalorian.
Yeah, The Mandalorian, they shoehorned in a larger plot device in The Mandalorian that features characters that have nothing to do with the movies to explain something that happened in the movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's ridiculous. And that line of thinking has trickled itself into the shows as well, right? Because then you have something like Boba Fett come out, and episode 5 has nothing to do with Boba Fett. It's all about The Mandalorian.
Yeah. Mandalorian season 2.5 within a completely different show.
Like, what are we doing here? So that is to say, it's unfortunate where Star Wars went in that regard, because it was the OG, it was the GOAT at building anticipation, to Edgar Wright's point.
Yeah.
And doing it the way that he's suggesting. And now they've become victims the same as Marvel has.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It is. I think Edgar Wright is so right. Yeah, again, he's so right. They made him into a joke. I haven't watched this new Scott Pilgrim show on Netflix yet, but I hear it is really good. And apparently there's a moment in it where, I don't know if it's voiced by Edgar Wright, but there's a character that plays a film director in it who's making a movie. And I think that character's name is Edgar Wrong.
It's funny. That's good.
Again, I don't know if Edgar Wright voices him, but I only bring that up to say, first off, that's funny. And secondly, Edgar Wright ain't wrong. He ain't wrong in this.
He's not wrong. And as much as I've championed the MCU and I do like it overall, I do think that taking a break, or at least stripping some of their plans and what they have going forward, I think that'd be fine. The 3 movies a year, I'm okay with. If you're going to do television, you can't do more than 2 shows a year as complementary pieces.
I'm with you.
I would cap it at that. I don't know if you really need to do more than that, because now you're just exhausting people.
Absolutely. I'm with you.
And so Edgar Wright, I'm totally there with you on that.
Yeah. I like him. Makes good movies.
Yeah. Makes good movies. I very much do agree. Before we get to Ridley Scott, though, we do need to talk about, or at least I wanted to bring up, the whole Scream fiasco.
Yeah, speaking of another franchise.
And maybe it should take a break as well.
After this, I think it has no choice.
Yeah. Now, I'm not privy to all of the politics. I'm certainly not an expert in it all.
Yeah.
However, I do think that what happened is extremely disappointing, because what we're talking about here is freedom of speech being undermined in a way that is murky, to say the least. Now, I understand that, governmental freedoms and employer freedoms are not the same. That doesn't always cross over. As much as I like my job, I can't just walk around at work completely saying vulgar things about my boss. He might not like that.
No,
I have the freedom to do that governmentally.
You do.
But he might not like it.
This is the thing, and this is why this is such a gray area. But I do agree with you that it is overall very disappointing in how it's being handled. But yeah, freedom of speech still it still has to come with a level of understanding around consequence, right?
Yes,
like consequence still has to be considered, but there's a fine line between consequence and blatant censorship. And this is where I think the conversation is sadly veering pretty close to.
I agree. And the thing about Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega and anyone else involved with Scream, where it crosses into these gray areas, is that they weren't directly talking about anyone within their company specifically.
With Spyglass. Yeah.
Spyglass. And while they certainly have adamant views and their perspective from a Jewish perspective, they weren't directly calling them out as much as they wanted the hatred to stop. They just wanted violence, broadly speaking, to come to an end, and we're just calling for a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So it's not as if they were directly attacking one side or saying that, they weren't stamping a flag in the ground, so to speak. And that, to me, is where I think all of this gets to be a little uneasy, because they're losing their jobs for essentially saying that violence is bad and we need to stop violence, from a broad perspective.
Yeah.
And it sets a precedent for these studios going forward that I don't love.
Well, that's my issue too, is the way it was sort of band-aided a bit, right? And again, I want to echo what you said. We're not experts in what's happening between Israel and Hamas right now. We certainly know of it, and we're following it as best we can because it is an important event. But we're also not experts in it, and you and I are also not Jewish, so we can't speak to it from a more biased perspective. I don't even know if Melissa Barrera is Jewish. I honestly am not sure, so that's just ignorant on my part, but clearly she's speaking from a point of view of hatred. That's something she feels very passionate about. And I'm trying to remember what she actually shared on her Instagram stories specifically. I think she was sharing articles that did utilize pretty aggressive language around like genocide. I think she was using ethnic cleansing, I think was part of it. And I don't think they were all her words there, but there was a sharing of that. So this is why I think the conversation is very gray, because on one hand, was there maybe an intensity in what she was choosing to share? Perhaps. Should that maybe come with consequence? Perhaps. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't. Is firing her from a movie the right form of consequence? I don't know if it is. I don't think that's the right way to go about it, because you're right. It sets this precedent that Hollywood is willing to band-aid certain things and prevent even further freedom of speech from happening. I think this sets a future precedent for studios that is kind of scary. And there are better ways to handle consequence for any action, whether it was right or wrong, than just simply removing someone from a project. And that's a shame artistically, because Melissa Barrera was so good in Scream 6. I didn't love her in Scream 5. But in Scream 6, I was really interested to see what they're going to do with Sam Carpenter. That was really insane.
I completely agree. And I think where things get trickier too is the hypocrisy of Hollywood and all of this. It'd be one thing if it was consistent across the board. And maybe Spyglass did have conversations with her behind closed doors, and she continued to do it anyway. I don't know. I honestly
don't know the context.
Don't know. However, what I do know is that she wanted this violence to end. However you think about that, whatever your views are. The crux of her argument was, I just want the killing to stop. Now, I don't think, again, if we're looking at it broadly speaking, I don't think anyone is inherently against violence ceasing. Where things, I guess, maybe rub me the wrong way is that when you look at the history of Hollywood, are there things that actors and actresses that they've done that are worse than calling out violence?
In a high level way, yes, absolutely.
So, and of course that, like, I say the question almost sarcastically because yes, actors and actresses get in trouble for a lot of things that are way worse than calling for a ceasefire.
Mm-hmm.
Way worse. Earlier this year, Ezra Miller gets in all sorts of trouble, and they're not fired.
Well,
they're not even close to being fired.
Okay, so you want to talk about college football yet again? Level 3 versus level 1 offense. That actor, Ezra Miller specifically, they partook in certain acts.
Very actively doing things that are hurting other people. And Warner Brothers is like, yes, we're moving forward. We want this movie to come out. We fully support Ezra. Now, I don't know if they were saying that explicitly, but by not firing them, it suggests that, hey, we're okay sweeping this under the rug. It's perfectly fine. Go see The Flash. You're going to love it. And maybe that was the wrong call because obviously that film ended up not doing very well.
Yeah.
My point in that is to say, because I'm not trying to compare them specifically, my point is to say that there is a precedent in Hollywood that, you know, the actors and actresses all the time do terrible things and they're not always fired. In fact, very rarely are they fired.
Yeah, and I get it. You know, it's a studio by studio basis. You kind of have to treat them like their own individual companies and how they want to handle this. But it is still an overarching business, and we would love to see some consistency when things like this happen. So the fact that you're using Ezra Miller and Melissa Barrera as two examples here, and the fact that we can't really compare them at all because they're vastly different. That's kind of the point. Right? To demonstrate exactly what you're talking about, the contradiction, the hypocrisy in how these things are being handled. And that's where I think this gets really scary is when someone like an Ezra Miller can do what they do, but their movie still comes out. In fact, it's heavily promoted that this is going to be the film that saves DC, right? This is the movie that's going to save DC, and it's bad. It's a bad movie.
It's not good. And there were conversations that Barry was going to be one of the few characters that transitioned into the new DC.
Oh my gosh, that's right. You did. I forgot about that.
It seems as if that's not the case now, that James Gunn is completely rebooting everything. But at the time, that was the conversation, right? It was Barry and Aquaman might be the two.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and again, they're saying that as Ezra Miller is in the middle of all this controversy.
Right, right.
I mean, come on now. And you're right. Spyglass and Warner Brothers, technically two different companies, and they're going to handle things in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there was a different way to handle this.
I agree.
Aside from just firing them, especially given Scream 6, where it leaves off with the Core 4, which is now just the Core 2, apparently.
I hate bringing this back to an artistic standpoint because there are so many bigger things happening outside just the art of it all. But I can't help but feel like it's a wasted opportunity now, given what happened with Scream 6 and the fact that you and I were not big fans of Scream 5 or Scream, as it's just called. We felt like Scream 6 was a massive improvement in the right direction. And I was really excited to see where it goes. Honestly, part of me initially thought that all of this was going to be somehow baked into the narrative of Scream 7. Like this was all just some type of publicity stunt. If there's one franchise to take advantage of some type of event nowadays for their own narrative, for their own filmmaking game, I could actually see it being the Scream franchise. Yeah. But I don't see that happening for this specific event between Israel and Hamas. I don't see that happening. If it were something else, I could see that being sort of a clever way that they're tricking us into thinking that something's happening when in actuality it's not. Yeah. So it would have been interesting if that were the case, but I doubt that's happening here, given the severity of what's going on over there.
I agree. There was a viral tweet. I don't know if you saw it, Brendan, that went around last week and I can't remember who it was, so forgive me, but the tweet simply was, the Wayans brothers have the opportunity to do the funniest thing.
Oh my God.
Could you imagine?
What would that be? Like Scary Movie 6 at this point now?
I'm not really sure, but I kind of want that to happen. As much as that franchise has fizzled out,
yeah.
Talk about an opportunity for them to come back to do another Scary Movie with Ortega and Barrera. Just incredible. Like, you kind of want that to happen. At least I do.
That's kind of genius. That is kind of genius. And of course, if you want to get someone rather talented to direct it who is actually really successful with horror comedies, I don't know if Christopher Landon's going to want to do Scream 7 anymore. Just get him to do that Scary Movie then.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity there that would be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this whole situation is unfortunate, and
it is.
Maybe Scream should take Edgar Wright's advice and take a little break.
I love the way you tied that back. Yeah. I was getting worried that this show is getting a little bit randomized, but no, we've got a through line. It's all connecting. There's a point to it all. And there you go. You just arrived at the point. I love how you did that.
All right, Brendan, let's talk about some coffee.
Oh, the best medicine.
Drink in the planet.
The best medicine. Oh, now's the time for it. The perfect weather. It's getting cold here in Pennsylvania. Sorry, Florida. But here it's like, this is the time for good autumn breeze coffee.
Yes, absolutely. The weather is cooling off in most places. That's not South Florida or Florida in general. So yeah, it's a great time to drink coffee. And that's why we love Coffee Cult, because they not only provide coffee, but it is the best coffee. And how do we know that? Well, they source specialty grade coffee from many countries around the world. The difference, though, between Coffee Cult and other coffee companies that use specialty grade is that they're very meticulous in the beans that they are selecting. It's one thing to just have specialty grade labeled coffee, but they're not all the same.
Right.
And a bag of specialty grade coffee, you might have a perfect green bean. Then you might have one that's maybe a little lesser grade. Maybe it's a little black. Maybe it's a little chipped. It's not quite perfect. Well, a lot of companies will just take the bag and that's what they roast.
Yeah.
And that's what you get. And they might blend that with Robusta coffee, which is a terrible coffee, but that's how they cheapen it. That's how they make it more cost effective.
Yeah.
Where Coffee Cult doesn't do that. They don't use Robusta. They don't even use the defect specialty grade. They only take the perfect green coffee beans, depending on, from the countries in which they get them.
So good.
And that's why the quality is unmatched. There's just not very many coffee companies that do it that way. On top of that, it's ethically sourced. It's roasted to order. You don't just have coffee sitting in a big warehouse somewhere waiting for you to buy it. No, they wait for your orders to come in. They roast it, and then it's sent to you a few days later. So it is extremely fresh, guaranteed fresh every single time. And with the holidays going on right now, they have a bunch of deals. If you want to go to coffeecult.com to check out those deals, sign up for the emails. You'll get all of the great deals there. But they have a holiday blend that's perfect for this time of year. They have a bourbon-aged dark roast.
I need that. I need that. I haven't tried it yet. I need that in my life.
Yeah, we'll have to make sure Brendan gets one of those.
Oh my gosh, please.
It's so good for this time of year. If you're a big Jamaican Blue Mountain fan, they have that coming in now as well. The Ethiopian Harar is just one of the best coffees on the planet. They have all of that available for the holiday season. So go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com, and get 15% off with our code ISF. Again, that's 15% off. Use our code ISF at coffeecult.com. All right, Brendan, it's time to do a little self-promotion.
Yeah, this is us. This is us you're hearing.
Patreon.
Yeah.
One of the best ways to support this show is through our Patreon, patreon.com/InSession InSession Film. You sign up there. You can sign up for as low as $1 a month. There's several other tiers there available that have their own rewards and perks available that you can go and check out. One of the best reasons to sign up, though, is that Brendan and we've been doing these new Patreon exclusive episodes.
Yes.
We try to get to them each week. The last month and a half or so, it's been a little harder because of everything going on in our lives.
Yeah, apparently there's a thing called Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, Brendan getting married, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, it's pretty important.
But typically we try to get at least one episode out a week. And, these exclusive episodes can be really about anything. Sometimes it's insights into the show. It's other parts of our lives. It's, of course, movies as well.
Sports.
It's everything. It's just, it's a comprehensive look at InSession Film.
Yeah. It allows you to get to know us outside of just the movie critics, right? I'm actually surprised. One thing I haven't done is grab my bass and play a couple licks. I feel like that's got to
do that.
I got to hook up my amp. Maybe I can hook my amp up to my audio interface and play a little bit of music for you. Maybe I'll do that for a bonus content someday.
You can certainly do that. The options are endless. And of course, if you sign up at Patreon, we'll always take your suggestions as well. So if there's a movie you want us to briefly talk about or a topic or anything, we would love to take your feedback on that. But those Patreon exclusives only live on Patreon. So you have to sign up to view those. Again, that's patreon.com/InSessionFilm. It's just a great way to help us out.
Yes.
And again, there's various rewards available along the way. So please go and help us out there at Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/InSessionFilm. Maybe this is where the point ends, unless it is the spear of one of the gladiators, because now we get to talk about Ridley Scott.
Talking about franchises apparently that take a long time and let people anticipate on the new one. Gladiator 2 coming out as long as it is after Gladiator. So,
exactly.
So Ridley Scott is taking Edgar Wright's advice.
Exactly. 20 plus years. And, I guess I was going to make fun of Ridley Scott, but enough time has passed that I think he has taken Edgar Wright's advice because, I was going to say, I think he should step away from the Alien franchise, but I guess he really has because Covenant came out in 2017.
And a new Alien movie does come out next year, directed by Fede Alvarez. So
Ridley Scott.
Yeah, I think he's a producer on it. So it might be one of those same cases where he's involved, but not really. Kind of like with Denis Villeneuve and Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, just taking a very small step backwards.
I'm actually looking forward to that Alien film. I think it has a lot of promise.
Yeah, looking forward to that. But yes, let's talk about Ridley Scott. Such a fascinating filmmaker, right? Because
absolutely.
He comes out in 1977 with The Duelist, which I haven't seen but have heard pretty good things about. And then his next film is a little movie called Alien in 1979. I think some of you have heard of it.
Yeah.
Followed that up with 1982's Blade Runner, another movie that I think some people have heard of. So coming out of the gate, just a legend, which is his next movie in 1985. See what I did there?
I like that.
So, I haven't seen Legend, although I want to say Ryan and Jay did talk about that film in some capacity when they did their Ridley Scott movie series.
They did. You go back to the InSession Film archives back when Extra Film was still a thing, and we had Ryan McQuaid and Jay Ledbetter hosting the Extra Film series, doing a Ridley Scott movie series especially. They talked about Legend. I believe they
fascinating conversation.
Well, it's fascinating because I think one of the big things we're going to talk about with Ridley Scott is just how he is notorious for always tinkering with his movies. When you think of Ridley Scott, you could do a full ranking, like a rather complete list of like maybe 12 movies, just ranking his director's cuts. It is that extensive. He's known for that. And that is something Ryan and Jay talked about a lot, especially with regard to Legend, because it has what many might consider to be one of the biggest significant improvements of a director's cut when compared to the original. I know Ryan and Jay only talked about the original 1980s film, and didn't have the best things to say about it. I remember
No, they did
that.
not.
But
Yeah.
I do hear the director's cut, wherever the heck it is. I think it's only available physically. I hear it's significantly better. I have heard that.
And that seems to be the case with a lot of his director's cuts. That's not always the case. Some director's cuts might think that they're adding more when that's not really the case. Ridley Scott seems to be a great visionary director, and that certainly comes through in his best films for sure.
Yeah.
But in his director's cuts, there seems to genuinely be added nuance that does make his movies all the more extraordinary. And it is interesting how it's somewhat baked into the process. You somewhat alluded to this earlier in the show, but Napoleon had a theatrical release with the knowledge ahead of time that there was going to be a director's cut released at some point.
Yeah.
So
this same year, it's coming out in a couple days, maybe.
Like, we know that it's coming very soon. It was the same thing. What was it, back in 2005 with Kingdom of Heaven, where the studios forced him to cut that movie down for a theatrical release while simultaneously understanding what they were asking him to do, and allowed him to edit a full version of that movie to be released not soon after that movie came out. Like, it's just part of his DNA.
It is.
Like, it's just the way he works.
And it's interesting because it's not always the case. Like, I think in the case of Alien, you mentioned Alien from 1979, which also does have a director's cut, but that's one that was sort of the other end of the spectrum, I think, because Ridley Scott is sort of known for wanting to do director's cuts, wanting to tinker with his movies and bring a different energy to it that he always wanted that maybe he didn't get a chance to do in the first go round. But Alien, he has always said, was always a director's cut of sorts. That was a studio thing where they're like, hey, we have this excess footage. You want to make a director's cut? And he did. But in actuality, I actually think the original cut of Alien that came out in 1979 is better than the so-called director's cut. I think it has a better energy, and the director's cut doesn't really add much to it. But for the most part, he's kind of known for offering these new cuts of his films that kind of reshape the entire experience. It's not just about adding length. I mean, Blade Runner now is considered a classic because of the so-called final cut. Not the original cut from 1982. It's the final cut that people associate as the great movie nowadays. And when you rent it anywhere, that's the version you get. And there's a reason for that.
Yep. Same thing with Kingdom of Heaven, right? I mean, that theatrical cut severely undermines characterization and motive.
That theatrical cut is...
It's bad.
That movie's a montage. It's just a montage.
It really is. It truly is a lengthy montage that features more action and adventure, when the spirit of that film, like Napoleon, I guess, is this huge historical epic. Yeah. And the director's cut of that film adds crucial context that was missing in the theatrical cut.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is certainly another one of those examples. And honestly, I'm real curious. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because you and I haven't really talked about Napoleon yet. We're going to review that later.
We'll save that.
But I'll say vaguely, there's an opportunity for Napoleon to mimic those two movies in terms of the theatrical versus the director's version.
And I think it has a chance given the lengthy length difference between the two, right? Because Kingdom of Heaven was what originally, I think 140 minutes, something like that. I think it was under 2.5 hours, maybe
something like that. Yeah.
And the director's cut is almost 3.5. Like, it adds a lot of material, and it's not just adding material to make it better. It's adding the right material. And maybe that'll be the case with Napoleon, because there is such a vast difference between 2 hours and 38 minutes and 4+ hours. Like, that's a huge difference. There.
Yeah. I think the director's cut for Napoleon is going to be 4 hours and 10 minutes.
That's amazing. That's insane.
I mean, and it's 2.5 hours already. And again, I don't want to get too much into it, but I've seen a lot of responses to it, generally speaking, not necessarily myself or you, but I've seen some responses to that film talking about how it feels like it's a long movie.
Yeah.
That because of its pacing, the way it's edited, and it feels like it's a movie that's 10 hours, even though it's 2.5.
Yeah.
Now, here's the interesting thing about it. When you add another hour and a half to that movie, does that mean that you're adding context and characterization and maybe elements that actually influence the pacing of the film that actually makes it feel more seamless, where a 4-hour version actually feels lesser than a 2.5-hour movie that seems like it's 10 hours.
That's why I said earlier, it's not about just adding material, it's adding the right material. Because I sit back and watch Kingdom of Heaven, and admittedly, it's been a while since I've seen either version of that film. But I remember thinking the original theatrical cut was kind of, for lack of a better term, it was kind of boring, even though there was a lot of action and stuff in it, right? Mm-hmm. And the nearly 3.5-hour version, whatever the director's cut's length is, it's a better paced experience because I cared about the people now. And that says all I need. Like, that's what I need for a movie like that. And all of a sudden the pacing feels better. It flows better because it has the right material added back in.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing with Ridley Scott too, and I didn't really think about this previously because I've never really framed it from this context, but Brennan was talking offline about how to look at this conversation, how we wanted to view it. And he mentioned something about maybe looking at his filmography and talking about some of his most underrated films.
Sure.
And I thought that was an interesting idea until I started looking at his filmography. And then it became vivid to me that there is a clear line in the sand for me when it comes to Ridley Scott. And that I either really like his movies, love them, some of them are all-timers, obviously, or I just flat out do not like them. There are very few here where I feel like they fall in the middle, and I'm usually a champion of the middle. I'm not an extremist by any means. I love the idea of a 3.5 star out of 5, like on Letterboxd, like a good 3.5. Like those are fine.
Mathematically,
there's nothing wrong with those.
A 3.5 out of 5, mathematically, that's a 7 out of 10. That's the same denominator there. So that, as far as I'm concerned, that equates to a very good review.
Yeah, like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I enjoy those kind of movies. On last week's show, we talked about a few of them, you know, like The Burial. I think I gave 3.5. I like that movie.
Yeah.
I liked Next Goal Wins more than you. I don't think that's anything grand by any means. I gave it a little 3 out of 5. I think it's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Easy breezy, 90 minutes and you're out of there. Like,
okay.
There's nothing wrong with that. And I look at his filmography, Ridley Scott's filmography. There aren't many of them for me. There really aren't. They're like good 4-5-star movies, or I want to forget these exist.
He's got some bad ones. And maybe we don't have to talk about, you know, the Exoduses of the world, or the 1492s, or the Robin Hoods, or the Body of Lies, or the Hannibal, like which are film.
But that's what you just listed half of his movies.
But then again, you know, I look at some of his 80s films. Admittedly, I haven't seen Black Rain in quite a while. But I remember, I think if I were to watch it now, I might have a 3.5 out of 5-star response to it, because I remember it being well made, especially for its time. And that's the thing. So many of his films are so well made that they're hard to fully dismiss. And maybe that's what'll help. That if I were to rewatch his entire filmography, which I don't think I'm going to do anytime soon, that's just a lot of work. But I wouldn't be surprised if I find some of those 3.5 out of 5-star films that you're talking about.
Yeah, and maybe that's the case, because obviously I'm looking at a lot of this through memory. I did not watch all of these leading up to this conversation. we're in the middle of award season. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a very busy time.
There are a few other priorities here.
Yeah. So I didn't have a chance to watch all of them. And as I noted earlier, I haven't seen all of them. The Duelist being maybe the most notable blind spot for me.
Yeah. I'm trying to look at his. I haven't seen White Squall.
Yes, I haven't seen that. Someone to Watch Over Me.
Haven't seen that. Haven't seen A Good Year. Actually, no. Now I don't think I've ever seen G.I. Jane either.
G.I. Jane is awful. That's my least favorite of them all.
Really interesting. Yeah. Okay,
do not like it. But again, I haven't watched that film in a long time. If I was to revisit that film, is it as bad as my memory suggests, or is it a simple 3.5 on Letterboxd?
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah.
That could be the case. I haven't seen it in a long time, but my memory of it is not great. And looking at my Ridley Scott list here on Letterboxd, I have it even below Hannibal, and I know how you feel about that movie.
I don't like Hannibal. That's bottom 5 for me from those I have seen. Yeah. I'm guessing. When I say I'm guessing that you and I have the same top 2, I think everyone has the same top 2.
Yeah,
for
I don't think
Scott.
there's any debating it.
No.
I mean,
the order between Alien and Blade Runner. I mean, I know there are some people who might put Gladiator somewhere in there as well. And maybe Thelma and Louise. I feel like those
Thelma and Louise would be the other one. If it's not Blade Runner or Alien, I would absolutely understand the argument for a Thelma and Louise,
which is my number 3. Now after that is where it gets a little tricky. I know he won Best Picture for Gladiator, and Russell Crowe won Best Actor for that, and that is a very rousing film. Like, I really enjoy that film.
I love it.
Do I think it's one of his very best? I don't know. I think as far as his grand historical epics are concerned, I think his best one might be The Last Duel. Actually, I think that, and that one, I liked it a lot, but didn't love it when I first saw it. But that one has weirdly stayed with me in the few years since it came out. What was it, 2021? I think it was. That is a really interesting movie. And I think that might be his most fascinating period piece, honestly.
The Last Duel, I love. I'm with you. I absolutely adore it. It was one of my favorite movies of its year. I'm not exactly sure where I had it ranked, but it was in my top 20. I had the screenplay for it nominated at the InSession Film Awards that year. I think that film was severely underrated in the award season. It should have been in the conversation more. It's one of his best directed movies, especially in quite a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, the last film that he directed that was even close to that caliber was probably Black Hawk Down. Well, and the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, excuse me.
Well, at least as far as the bigness is concerned, you mean, maybe. But as far as quality, even though it's a very different tonal experience, some might say The Martian. I was going to say The Martian.
Yeah, I'm overlooked that
The
here.
thing, like, The Martian feels so disconnected from Ridley Scott's filmography to me because it's just so tonally optimistic.
And that to me is so interesting, especially when you phrase it that way, Brendan.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not going to let this go. I'm not. I'm going to continue to champion this forever. Because when The Martian comes out, it gets nominated for Best Drama at the Globes under the comedy category. And people lost their goddamn minds and still are upset about it. But here's the thing about it. I know that this is a little controversial, so maybe embrace yourself, buckle your seatbelt. That film is hysterical. It's
really funny. It's a very funny movie.
And the humor of it is, it's not just overtly funny in the way it's written on the page and the way Matt Damon delivers a lot of that dialogue in his performance. It is thematically at the nucleus of that movie. It's built into the characterization and emotion of that whole film and experience.
Yeah, it's a therapy session in many ways.
It is.
Yeah.
So humor is vital. It is vital, not just to the experience of the audience and what it's experiencing as we're watching it. It is vital to the characters of the movie.
Yeah.
It's the nucleus of it.
No, and you know what? if this gets us both canceled for thinking of The Martian as a comedy, then so be it. But I actually do agree with you on that.
I mean, what are we doing here?
I just think it's interesting in the context of Ridley Scott as a filmmaker. When you look at his filmography, it's just like the comedic nature of that film feels so disconnected from, like, let's say the meanness of Alien Covenant. Which is like I watch Alien Covenant, which I feel like we're on different pages on that film.
I do not like it, and its brutality and bleakness is certainly a part of it.
Well, that's the thing. Like I've learned to appreciate that film for reasons that might not even have been the intent. Like Alien. When I see Alien Covenant now, I think to myself, this movie was directed by a complete asshole. But in a way, I think it almost feels like for a movie about the cynical nature of human beings being obsessed with creation that now their creators or their creations have wanted to create. Here's a man basically making I don't want to say a joke, but really having an interesting play at his own creation, the Alien franchise, and kind of playing along with the thematic joke a little bit, which is maybe what you don't want from an Alien movie. But in the context of Ridley Scott as a person and how vocal he is, I've come to appreciate the inherent meanness of that movie. And it's kind of baked into a lot of his movies, though.
There is an inherent violence or brutality to a lot of them. I don't disagree. And when it's funneled through the correct lens, I think it's great. That's why I think Gladiator is truly one of his best films. It's not just this Oscar winner for Best Picture and director, actor, whatever it all ended up winning. I think it's a truly great film. Remove awards out of it. It's effective because the film takes time building up the character and the emotion driving the choices of Maximus, that when the brutality comes, you feel the weight of what he's experiencing, what he had told us through conversations with other characters or voiceover, whatever the case may be. Like, you truly do feel the weight that, like, this burden that he's carrying. So then when we see how it all crystallizes in the end, there is this emotional catharsis. You juxtapose that to Covenant, which equally has this bleak brutality to it. And the bleakness, I don't have any problem with. Bleakness on its own terms, I think is great when it's done right. Such as, this is going to be a weird example, but it's the first one that comes to mind, Steven Spielberg's War Horse. That is an incredibly bleak experience, and I won't hear otherwise.
Well, okay. And I think the difference there, and when I say meanness, I don't necessarily mean bleakness. All the time, I don't necessarily mean that. But I guess in the case of Alien Covenant, I just don't think it's meant to be taken seriously. Like, I really don't.
Well, and maybe that's the disparity between you and I, because there is a meanness to Covenant that is there. However, there are these contrivances throughout the film that I do think the film is shoehorning in to, I guess, ground some sort of emotionality.
Yeah, maybe.
Like, the film doesn't care about these characters. We're going to only care about the mythology and, again, the world building. That's what we're really going to emphasize. And we're going to emphasize the violence of the action that takes place. But when it comes to Tennessee, we're going to throw out this reveal that he's married to Maggie. And when she dies,
I actually thought that watching it again, I thought that was part of the joke.
But the film doesn't treat it like it's a joke. Like, that to me is my problem. Is like,
that's fair. That's fair.
It's treating it as it's this genuine, emotional, heartstring thing. Like, if that was the intent, then I admire the film treating it that way. But given the trajectory of these movies, even going back to Prometheus, it's hard for me to understand that all of a sudden it's going to become a satire. Well, like, I just don't think that's the case. I do think the film is trying to take itself seriously, and I think it's taking its mythology and its spiritualism, if you will, very seriously. And then but because we're spending so much time there and we're going to be so mean to these characters, we gotta have a way to draw the audience in, and so we're gonna make these characters married all of a sudden, and it's contrived and it's a joke. Like to me, that's where it becomes a joke. And I mean
rewatching. Maybe I just watched it with that lens on a revisit. That I was kind of getting a bit of a it's a movie that I think genuinely hates every human that's in there, except for David.
Well, I don't disagree with that,
and that's kind of what I like about it. Like it's a movie that hates humans. It's a movie that hates humanity.
And in a way, this was a satire on the Alien franchise, I would agree with you. Then I would like the movie.
And I think Ridley,
but I don't think that's what it is.
I think he kind of did that given the response from Prometheus. I think that's what he felt like he was forced to do because people didn't respond to the creation that he was spearheading once again in the way that he would have wanted. So he kind of played with the alien anticipation of it all a little bit. Again, if that's what you don't want from an alien movie, then so be it. And that's perfectly fair because I'm not even sure if that's what I want from an alien movie. But I've come to kind of appreciate it as a Ridley Scott answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wish I could see it that way. I just don't think that's what it is in execution. If
it's not consistent, like I don't think
goal. Then I think he's a really bad satirist. I think he should not make those kind of movies then.
Well,
because that doesn't come through in the final product at all.
And maybe satire is not the right word. Maybe farce is probably the better word for it, given the extreme nature of it.
But again, I don't feel it being farcical. I feel like the film is taking itself seriously.
Yeah, I don't know. I will say I think Prometheus takes itself very seriously, and that's a film I want to love so much more because it's an original idea, and I just don't think it's a beautiful looking data dump of mythology is what that movie is. That's all that movie is. I don't like Prometheus. I never have, and I tried watching that again not too long ago, and same issues I've always had still persist for me. But it's just weird that I've had a bit of a warmer reaction to Alien Covenant as time has gone on. And I don't think the film's perfect. It is. But again, that's maybe one that now sits in that 3.5 out of 5 star range for me on Letterboxd.
Yeah, I don't think he gets to have his cake and eat it too. I think if anything, that just makes the film all the more infuriating to me because if farce or satire or comedy was the goal, then he fails miserably. And I don't think he's that bad of a filmmaker. I don't. I think it was a misguided screenplay that once again wanted to emphasize mythology and the alien over characters, and the character, instead of emphasizing a character to have a Ripley vehicle, if you will, those films simply become about too many characters. It's like, whose movies are these?
Well,
and as a result, there's nothing to funnel any of that humanity through.
Well,
which is why I think any sort of farcical angle here just falls flat and it feels empty to me. And then the only thing that's left are two things: the meanness on its own and these contrived relationships, this contrived attempt at some sort of human emotion that feels empty because we don't care about these characters. We don't know them at all until you, at the last second, tell us, oh, they're married. And now don't you feel sad for him? No. I don't feel sad for him.
And I think that's, I don't know. I weirdly think that's kind of the point. I weirdly do. And maybe I'm just looking for that. I don't know, but it's also given the fact that where the film does go, it reveals that I think its main character was never a human in the first place. So the lack of humanity doesn't really bother me. And to be fair, I actually really like the character of David. I think Michael Fassbender's take on that character is genuinely fascinating.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with that
it's to a point that I now see him as the main character of both Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And that weirdly kind of fixed some issues for me a little bit, which is I didn't love Prometheus enough to say that I think Ridley Scott needs to finish this trilogy. I'm not sure if I'm that interested in it anymore. But if there is one thing I would like to see is at least an acknowledgement of David somewhere. Because I find that character really provocative.
Okay. I mean, I want to see Covenant the way that you're describing it. I really do. I just don't think it's
I had a weird reaction watching that again. It's like, man, I must have just been I must have been pissed off in the right way to just respond to it the way that I did. Maybe if I watch it again in a really happy, optimistic mood, maybe after watching The Martian, I'll probably be like, you know what, this movie sucks.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing, I think, makes sense on paper, but to me, that's as far as it goes. I just don't think the execution is there to make any sense of what you're saying. At any rate, regardless of that, we could certainly debate that all day.
Yeah.
I think it does emphasize all the more, though, circling it back to what we were saying about The Martian, just how much of a tonal disparity it is.
It is.
Because The Martian is not even close. The closest thing that he's probably made, aside from maybe Thelma and Louise, that's like, that's looking at his filmography. There's nothing that even comes close that to The Martian as far as being a comedy in his filmography.
The Martian could have been a Disney film. Like, it's that level of optimism and joy that it has.
It is,
like,
and it's genuinely hysterical, and it's built into the DNA of that movie. I'm sorry, but that is a comedy. It is. Just because it takes place on Mars and there's a whole space sci-fi element of it doesn't make it a drama.
Right.
It really is more of a comedy than it is a drama.
Yeah.
Especially at its DNA.
Yeah. Well, and it's and the comedy is a character. It really is a character in that movie. I love this lengthy conversation we just had to not only say that The Martian is a tonal disconnect from later career Ridley Scott, but also answering my own question I prompted, what do you think is an underrated Ridley Scott film? Apparently, I think it's Alien Covenant nowadays. So I got to at least answer that for a long-winded way.
And that's why it was funny when you proposed it. And initially, again, I thought it was interesting, but then I looked through his filmography. I'm like, no, don't like that. Don't like that. Don't like that. Love that. Don't like that. Love that. Like, I didn't find, there wasn't a whole lot that I found in the middle.
I would say Matchstick Men, I think, is pretty close to being underrated. I think that's a very good film.
That one was probably the only one that because I'd probably put that at 3.5 on Letterboxd.
Yeah, I would too.
I do like that film on the whole.
I really want to catch the director's cut of The Counselor, which I've only seen the original cut of and didn't care for it. But I hear that's another case where the director's cut is a vast improvement. I've heard that from a lot of people, which really gets me curious.
And that's one I probably should watch given Ridley Scott's filmography. And I'll be open-minded. I do preach that all the time, so I should probably walk the walk there. I just was so repulsed by the theatrical cut that I do not want to experience those characters again. But he does have a very good track record with his director's cuts that I think giving that one another go is something that should happen probably at some point.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the cast I think is mostly very good.
It was great.
Yeah, except for one. Not huge on Cameron Diaz. Not gonna lie.
I like her in The Holiday.
Not sure if I like her there, but Fassbender's great. Bardem is great. Cruise is great. Brad Pitt. I mean, truly, very Natalie Dormer is. I forgot that she was in that film. So
yeah.
I mean, really good cast. And it's Ridley Scott. So I mean,
it's probably worth
as much
the
as
second try. Yeah.
I should probably give it another go. But that first watch, a doozy.
So what is at this point now? What is your top 5 Ridley Scott films?
So my top 5 are pretty boring, I guess, because, okay. I will say this. My 6 and 7, I feel very strongly for. That on any given day, depending on the mood, depending on what I watched last, it's very possible that these are in my top 5. So even though they sit at 6 and 7, I consider them top 5 in terms of quality, if that makes sense.
No, makes sense.
Math is just math.
Yeah. And they could shift to a number 5 spot, maybe if you were to rewatch them and have a more top of mind. Yeah, I get that.
Absolutely. So I'm at Alien, Blade Runner, Thelma and Louise. Okay. Top 3.
Yep.
I don't think that's ever changing.
Yeah, that's same top 3 for me. But I mean, then again, we're talking about 3 films that I think are perfect 5s. I think those are all perfect movies for their respective kinds.
At number 4, for many of the reasons we've already talked about, I have the comedy The Martian.
Oh, yeah, okay. You have that pretty high.
I have that very high. I think it's great. There's not much about that film I would change. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I do think the humor of it is wonderful, but when it does evoke drama sensibilities, I think it's very good there. And Matt Damon is just terrific.
Yeah.
It's, he's giving a singular, isolated performance where he has to draw that line of coping, which is, again, why the humor is so necessary to that film, right? Because he has to keep himself from going insane.
Yep.
And he toes that line impeccably, where it's often very funny. It's very compelling to see him kind of dwell in that humor again as a coping mechanism, because there are times where he does start to suffer.
Yeah.
And you see that back and forth. It's just a really great performance.
Yeah, I'm with you. And any movie that has that kind of affinity for disco music is A-okay in my book.
Great. Absolutely love it. Okay, at number 5, I do have Gladiator.
Okay.
There's always going to be pushback because of, and maybe we need to add on to the InSession Film Store, Brendan, and not just have the Moonlight La La Land t-shirt, because there's always pushback against Oscar winners. But the spirit of the Gladiator discourse is very similar. Imagine if Gladiator lost Best Picture or didn't win any awards, and it had the La La Land like trajectory. I think the reputation of that film would probably be even better than it already is.
We'd respect how well made it is and how well performed it is, because that is a movie star performance if there ever was one in that movie. We would respond to how pleasing it is. I forget who it was. I think I saw on Letterboxd. I think it was Scott Tobias of all people. I think he rated that film and said it's basically a Rocky sequel with Roman clothing. And it's, but he's not really wrong. And honestly, that sounds awesome. Like if someone were to describe a movie like that to me, I want to see that. And if that is Gladiator, then okay, that's a great movie. I take that as a praise.
Yeah, I mean, it's this remarkable spectacle, and it is really diverting in that regard. It has some remarkable performances.
Yeah.
Some truly best of that year, especially best of Ridley Scott's filmography. Just incredible cast across the board.
Absolutely.
And it's not just Russell Crowe, it's Joaquin Phoenix, it's everybody. That
Connie Nelson's so good in it too.
Absolutely.
Richard Harris.
Yeah. Incredible. That whole cast is fantastic. So, so it has that element of it, and then there's the whole emotional backbone of that movie that I think is genuinely fantastic, that is maybe missing in some of his other spectacles. I'm just throwing that out there. At any rate, that's great. So that's my number 5, genuinely phenomenal movie. And then my 6 and 7 are The Last Duel and Black Hawk Down, which I think are some of the best directed of their respective years. We talked about Black Hawk Down not that long ago.
Yeah.
In the 2001 retrospective.
2001 retrospective. Yeah, it was just a few months ago at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe not even a few months ago. It could have been a month and a half ago.
Yeah. Back in September, I believe it was. So
yeah,
that is a remarkably directed movie. The Last Duel is, and again, remove The Martian out of the equation. The Last Duel is probably his best directed movie since Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
So, those two movies are great. The rest of them, I think, are a little interchangeable. Well, Kingdom of Heaven, I have at number 8. I think that's still very good.
That's the thing. He's got a lot of movies that I think are in that very good range. I think he is one of those directors that it's pretty easy to find a consensus, right? At least like a select few films that are topping the list. That order can certainly fluctuate. Someone might be a Blade Runner guy as opposed to being an Alien guy, right? But you always tend to see those two films topping the list alongside Gladiator and Thelma and Louise and a few others. And those are my top 3, Alien, Blade Runner, and Thelma and Louise. Black Hawk Down and The Last Duel currently round out my top 5, but Gladiator and The Martian are not too far behind from there.
Okay, interesting. So we're a little bit swapped in that regard.
Yeah, but it sounds like at this point now, I mean, I have to do a couple rewatches here to see if anything changes. I might end up really responding to, I don't know, the director's cut of Napoleon. Maybe that'll be like, oh my God, this is Kingdom of Heaven even better. It's like maybe I'll have one of those reactions, and it escalates even higher to like my number 6 or something like that. But yeah, it sounds like we at least have the same top 7 right now, just in a different order.
Yeah, just a slightly different order. Yeah. So that's kind of where I stand. And then I have American Gangster at 8.
I got to rewatch that film. I remember really liking it, but there are aspects of it I forget about. I need to give that a revisit.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at, because again, the rest of these are like, once we moved beyond American Gangster, I noted that Matchstick Man I do like. That would round out my top 10. And then after that, it's a lot of meh. And it becomes a little bit more interchangeable, at least at this point, until I do a rewatch. I will say, and I did joke about this when it came out, I had some sort of snarky award for it when we did our InSession Film Awards that year. But all the money in the world, I have to give him a lot of credit for. It's a movie that, on its own terms, in a vacuum, is fine.
It's good. It's a good thriller.
I think it's perfectly adequate. So maybe that's the other middling 3 stars on Letterboxd that I would throw out there. However, I do have a pretty heavy respect for it, because that's a movie that was finished. It was done. It was made. It was in the can. It was ready.
The trailer was out. Kevin Spacey was all over that movie.
All over the marketing.
Yeah.
And then the Spacey controversy drops. They reshoot all of his scenes with, of course, a different actor, and Christopher Plummer.
Yeah.
And re-release it on its original date.
I think it was like they had to reshoot like 22 scenes in 8 days or something like that.
Something like that.
Well, I mean, say what you will about Ridley Scott. The guy's efficient.
It's amazing how he was able to pull that off when the film was in the can. And not only that, Christopher Plummer, genuinely very good.
He is.
Like,
he's good. He's great.
Like, I don't know how they pulled that off. Like, to just somehow make that work in an 8-day span. Yeah. Let's get all the crew back together. Got to get all the lighting, everything aesthetically the same. And I don't know, maybe that sounds more cumbersome to me than the experts who could do that.
Any other director, I could see that being problematic and troublesome. But one of the things that kickstarted this conversation in the first place, and why we wanted to talk about Ridley Scott, is just the respect we have for his "I don't give a shit" attitude. That's right. True. Yeah. Well, and not even "I don't give a crap." That's not right. Not the right way to put it. It's his lack of bull crap, right?
Yeah.
Like, he not only doesn't take no for an answer, but he doesn't care if you disagree with him. He's very vocal about that. And I can only imagine a man with that type of personality being able to just simply snap his fingers, and people are going to be like, okay, we got to listen to him. We got to get back and do this movie. So he's got that power. He's very vocal in that way. Absolutely.
And speaking of, I think that he was vocal at the time that Plummer was the guy he originally wanted anyway. I think Spacey ended up getting cast because we needed star power. Ironically, you needed a name to sell the movie. And then ultimately that was the name that was removed from it all.
Yeah. And at that time, House of Cards was still kind of a talking point.
It was huge still. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, I get it. I mean, Spacey, absolutely one of the worst humans. He is one of the best actors of his generation, though.
He is.
He was fantastic. So I understand why executives would make a decision like that.
I know.
But I think, given what you just noted there about Ridley Scott, it is fascinating that he would just use that as an excuse. It was like he had the cameras ready just in case. I was like, are you sure we can't still get Plummer? Because I'll do it. And then, and then the news drops, and he's like, let's go.
Oh, man. If he can get so much of this done with just a couple words, he can get it done at his age. I gotta shake the guy's hand. I really do.
Absolutely. I guess my last thought on this, and then we can wind down for this week's show, though. I do appreciate his. I mean, I guess it's not even just that ambition and this level of not putting up with anything, whether it be from actors, studio execs, whatever the case may be. He is very efficient, and he wants to make the kind of movie that he wants to make, whatever that may be.
Right.
And I do love, as much as I joked about it earlier, and perhaps myopically, because I haven't enjoyed his later Alien stuff, as we talked about earlier.
Right.
But I love that also he was willing to drop it. Like it just didn't, like he just didn't care.
Yeah.
And he goes from Covenant to, All the Money in the World, to The Last Duel, to House of Gucci, to Napoleon, and now going back to Gladiator. Like, those are just all distinctly different movies.
They are. They really are.
He's just wanting to do what he wants to do. And it doesn't always come off seamlessly. Like, it's a little uneven, which is why some of his comments last week about like superhero movies and big franchises, it's a little ironic, I guess, because it's not as if his filmography is just topped with classics. I mean, no one can take away those top three.
No.
All timers.
Yeah.
And he'll always have that in his back pocket for sure. That's like Star Wars and, well, maybe not Star Wars because some other movies are pretty great. However, but most franchises, Marvel, like they're not going to touch anywhere near those top three.
Yeah.
But I just find it a little hilarious and ironic though, because it's not as if he's out here just killing it every time. He really hasn't. Yeah. Especially this, since 2000 with Gladiator, it's been a lot of hit or miss.
But even so,
hit or miss.
His misses, for the most part at least, are at least kind of interesting. Like Prometheus, I don't like, but it's an interesting movie aesthetically speaking, and there are some great scenes in it. I only think movies like Robin Hood and Body of Lies are complete misfires, and Exodus: Gods and Kings I think is basically a complete misfire. But All the Money in the World has an interesting backstory, as we talked about, that at least kind of it falls into the final product in a very weird way. House of Gucci is kind of campy. I actually really appreciate the camp factor of that movie. So like there are things about his movies that even when they don't work, I'm latching on to something. A lot of times it's the filmmaking. A lot of times it's the tone, the energy, the attitude. Not many filmmakers still do that. So I have to appreciate it for it.
And you do make a good point. Even his lesser films, not all of them, but certainly several of them, do have at least something of interest to offer. Even if they're not great. Like, I don't love House of Gucci, but there are moments of that film that make me cackle. And some of the performances and the campiness of it is electrifying. It can be, it has its moments for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing with Napoleon, which we'll get to. All the Money in the World. The plumber stuff is genuinely very good.
Yep.
And I don't like Prometheus or Alien Covenant, but the David stuff is very interesting. I do agree. Yeah. So like even his lesser work, even with Robin Hood, that film gets a lot of heat as one of his lesser movies. And maybe that's deserving. I don't know. But there are elements of that film that I do appreciate in terms of the scope of it and the way some of it is filmed, the performances. I think Russell Crowe is still good in that movie. So like, it's not a film that I'm completely appalled by.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. But rarely am I appalled by his movies. Maybe except for Exodus: Gods and Kings. That I do think is his worst movie.
Yeah. I say that though to say there are maybe two here though that I'm still kind of in the middle on. Like House of Gucci, Covenant, Prometheus.
But here's the thing,
The Counselor.
He has
2 stars or less for me.
He still has a visual palette that's always consistent, right? Like we talk about directors having characteristics when you go to see one of their movies, whether it's good or not. You could tell it was directed by that individual. And something about Ridley Scott, even in a movie like House of Gucci, for instance, it just looks and feels so huge. Like it's just big. And his movies always feel big. I often say his movies are IMAX movies without IMAX cameras. Like they have that kind of grandness to it, and I don't really know how he does it.
Mm-hmm.
Even in films I don't like Robin Hood, I don't really care for, but there's still a bigness to that one, a literal bigness to it.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's evident in all of his movies, honestly.
Yeah, I very much do agree. A fascinating filmmaker, and looking forward to Gladiator 2. However that looks.
Paul Mescal, so it's got to be at least interesting.
Absolutely. Cannot wait for that. So I think that'll do it for this week's show. I think we'll go ahead and wind things down there. So if you agree or disagree with anything that we had to say, be sure to hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave a comment below.
Yeah.
Let us know how you feel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to subscribe, leave reviews there. We'd really, really appreciate it. Be sure to check out our latest Women in Session. It's going up a little late this week because things have been insanely busy in my life. And I apologize to them. I wasn't able to get to it earlier today as I usually do, but that is coming soon. So stay tuned for the latest Women in Session as well. And as we noted earlier, we're going to have a lot of reviews out this week. So we got Napoleon, we have Poor Things, we have Saltburn.
Yep.
Those will all be out sometime later on this week. So it's very busy, but it's the fun time of year. Watching a lot of good stuff.
Fun. Yeah. And then you got to work at them.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Like what we're doing now. But we talk about them very passionately because we love them.
Absolutely. I did my Saltburn notes earlier today.
Oh, you have notes for that one. I still have to do that.
Yes. I got that one ready. I'm halfway through my Napoleon notes. So I'll be ready for that soon.
Okay. All right. I gotta say, man, like most of these reviews, I've actually gone in noteless for many of them. Hopefully it doesn't show.
No, I don't think so. I know I was talking with my brother earlier over the weekend because we, of course, talked through all of the Michigan football games.
Yeah.
And he had asked me about the holdovers because my uncle, who's a big movie guy, was curious as well. And I told him I thought it was one of our most fascinating conversations we've had all year.
That was a great conversation.
I loved it.
I was proud of that.
I hope a lot of other people enjoy it or get as much out of it as I did in the moment when we were having the conversation. But
felt right.
It felt very thorough, and it was. I loved it. So I do hope people are getting something out of it anyway.
I hope so. Yeah. If you're not, let us know. What can we do better?
Exactly. I'm always looking for feedback. Please hit us up. I would love to hear any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, same.
But yes, I'll be looking forward to these reviews. But I wanted to bring up Saltburn because I was going through my notes, and the reaction to that film has been fascinatingly all over the place. There's people that are not at all in love with Emerald Fennell. There's a lot of people defending her and the criticism of Saltburn, but it's a film that is seemingly getting more positive than negative reviews. Like, it's hard to narrow down the discourse. It's just kind of all over.
It is. I forget who it was that tweeted this, but said something along the lines of, movies can't just be fine anymore. They can't be middle of the road. And then went on to say, Saltburn is fine. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that as far as the movie is concerned, but I think it's an interesting point that there's always this dichotomy when movies get mixed reviews. And I'm using that term loosely, mixed, because I don't even know what that really means anymore.
Yeah. I mean, in Emerald Fennell, for better or worse, she loves to provoke. And I think when you provoke the way she does, it, I think, leaves room for a little bit of that extremism where people just find it so grating and arrogant, or they're so entranced by it that they find themselves kind of more on one of those extreme ends or closer to them than being directly in the middle.
Sure.
Which we can certainly talk about in the review. But I think that's my best guess at anyway, why the discourse seems to swing the pendulum back and forth so wildly. Because it's done that quite drastically.
You and I, like movies that have gotten mixed reviews, to say the least, that took big swings like that, we always acknowledge that we like when movies do that, even if we don't like the final product. I mean, I'm still going to stand by Damien Chazelle's Babylon. Like, that is a movie that takes swings, and I think it's his best movie. If that's the end of my my social media feed, then so be it.
Yeah, look, I think there's more. Well, I don't know. I guess some people do find Babylon pretty presumptuous and ostentatious, but yeah, I'm with you. I like it when films take swings for the most part. I think it just depends on the filmmaker and what they're trying to do, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there because I don't want to get too much in the Saltburn right now. It's just been fascinating to watch from
JD's feeling the burn. He's feeling the burn.
You know, I am feeling the burn because of Saturday.
Yeah, you're still feeling that burn.
I'm feeling on fire. Things have been a lot of fun.
He's bright and yellow right now. Bright and gold, actually.
Exactly. Well, with all of that said, we do appreciate everyone tuning in this week. We hope you enjoyed our conversation here on Ridley Scott. Go see Napoleon if you haven't had a chance yet. Stay tuned for Saltburn, Poor Things, Napoleon. Those reviews coming soon, and Women in Session. So be on the lookout. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. The Martian. It's a comedy. It's okay.
Funny.
It's okay.
Makes me laugh. Makes me laugh.